The gas chambers did not come first. Before the sealed rooms, before the Zyklon B, before the industrial machinery of Auschwitz and Treblinka and Sobibor, there were men standing in fields and forests with pistols, and the pistols broke them. That is where this story ends. It is also where it begins. Between 1941 and 1943, a crisis quietly unfolded inside the SS. Not a military crisis, not a logistical one, but a psychological one. Men tasked with mass murder were breaking down. Some wept, some got drunk and could not stop. Some fired into the ground. Some asked to be transferred. A small number refused outright. And the leadership of the Third Reich, Heinrich Himmler, Reinhard Heydrich, men who had engineered genocide, found themselves urgently searching for a solution. Not a solution to the killing, a solution to the killers. What they discovered and what they tried to hide is the subject of this video. Before we go back to the beginning of this story, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. This channel covers military and historical events the way they deserve to be covered, with verified facts, real sources, and no shortcuts. Hit that button and let's go back to the summer of 1941. June 22nd, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Germany invades the Soviet Union along a front stretching nearly 2,000 miles. It is the largest military operation in human history. 3 million German and Axis soldiers pour east, and following behind them, not fighting, not securing terrain, are 4 units whose assignment is something else entirely. They are called Einsatzgruppen, action groups, special task forces, their written orders, signed by SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, designate specific categories of people for immediate execution: Soviet Communist Party officials, political commissars, and Jews in party and government posts. The language is bureaucratic, almost clinical, but the meaning is clear. There are approximately 3,000 men across all 4 Einsatzgruppen, A, B, C, and D, moving north to south, along the Eastern Front. They are not ordinary soldiers. Their ranks include lawyers, economists, academics. Several unit commanders hold doctoral degrees. These are educated men, career men, men who in another life might have been judges or professors or civil servants. In this life, their job is to kill. They begin immediately. Within days of the invasion, the shootings start. Adult Jewish men first, then, by August, the orders expand. Women, children, the elderly, everyone. Historian Raoul Hilberg estimated that between 1941 and 1945, the Einsatzgruppen and related agencies killed more than 2 million people, including approximately 1.3 million Jews. 1/3 of all Jewish Holocaust victims died not in a gas chamber but from a gunshot, usually in an open field, next to or inside a pit that had been dug for the purpose. The weapon most frequently used in the final moments. The coup de grace for the wounded, for those who had not fallen cleanly into the pit, for the children who had survived the volley, was a pistol. And the pistol, it turned out, was a problem. To understand why the pistol specifically, you need to understand the mechanics of these executions, because they were not clean, and they were not fast, and they were not the orderly event that SS bureaucratic language tried to suggest. The standard procedure was this: victims were marched to the site, forced to undress, ordered to the edge of a prepared pit. A firing line would discharge. Bodies fell or didn't fall. Many wounded survived the initial volley. Many fell into the pit alive. In the chaos, people screaming, some running, blood everywhere in the mud. Someone had to follow, behind with a pistol, and finish what the rifles had started. That task fell to officers and to rotating squad members. It placed a man inches from another human being, face sometimes visible or nearly so, even when the protocol called for a shot to the back of the neck, at close range, again and again, through an entire afternoon, through an entire evening, into the night. At the Rumbula massacre, outside Riga, Latvia, in late November and early December 1941, approximately 25,000 Jews were killed over 2 days. Victims began assembling at 4 out in the morning. They walked in columns of 1,000 toward the forest. Those who could not keep pace were shot at the roadside. The executions continued until dark, then resumed. The next day, at Babi Yar, a ravine outside Kiev, Ukraine, 33,771 Jews were killed in 2 days, September 29th and 30th, 1941. It remains one of the largest mass shootings in human history. Reports sent back to Berlin were matter-of-fact, almost like inventory documents. But what those reports did not describe, what the official paperwork consistently left out, was what was happening to the men holding the guns. In the fall of 1941, an Einsatzgruppen commander watched his unit execute 100 Jewish men. Afterward, shaken by what he had seen in his men's eyes, he went directly to Heinrich Himmler. What he said, recorded in post-war accounts, was this: "Look at the eyes of the men in this commando, how deeply shaken they are. These men are finished for the rest of their lives. What kind of followers are we training here either? Neurotics or savages?" That report reached Himmler. And Himmler, who would later describe the killing as the most difficult duty the SS had ever undertaken, understood that something had to change. The word the SS men used among themselves for what they were experiencing was Seelenbelastung, burdening of the soul. It is a striking phrase to emerge from the perpetrators of genocide, but it is documented. It appears in post-war testimony, in psychological assessments, in the private letters of men who carried out these executions. A Wehrmacht neuropsychiatrist who treated soldiers affected by the shootings estimated that approximately 20% suffered from psychological disorders associated with the killing. In November 1941, lawyer and resistance member Helmut von Moltke wrote to his wife that at least one hospital existed specifically for SS men who had broken down while executing women and children. Men who had broken down, executing women and children. Compared to other SS and Wehrmacht divisions, the Einsatzgruppen recorded significantly higher rates of alcoholism, desertion, and suicide. Unit leaders frequently distributed extra alcohol rations to men before and after execution operations. It was not a secret, it was policy, a recognized tool for getting the job done. Himmler himself, in a directive to his commanders, insisted that comradely gatherings be held on the evenings following difficult operations, his language for execution days. He specified, with some apparent awareness of the irony, that these gatherings should not end in the abuse of alcohol. They routinely did anyway. The question of who refused, and what happened to those who did, is one that historians spent decades trying to answer, because it was central to the post-war defense used by virtually every SS perpetrator, tried at Nuremberg and afterward. The claim stated plainly, "We had no choice. If we refused, we would have been shot." The historical record does not support this. Researcher David Kitterman, who studied 135 documented cases of individuals and groups who refused to execute Jews, hostages, partisans, or prisoners of war, found that not one of them was killed for that refusal. Not one. Historian Doris Bergen, whose work on the Holocaust is considered among the most authoritative, states it directly. Germans were not forced to be killers. Those who refused to participate were given other assignments or transferred. The Einsatzgruppen trial judges at Nuremberg addressed this explicitly in their ruling. No one was coerced at gunpoint into personally pulling the trigger. The court found no defendant who had been threatened with death for refusing to kill. What happened instead to those who refused or expressed moral objection was more complicated and in its way more revealing. Officers such as Klaus Hornig, a German army officer who screamed at his men to stop during an execution, then invoked paragraph 47 of the German military code, which allowed soldiers to refuse orders recognized as illegal, were imprisoned, beaten, stripped of rank, and threatened. Hornig's court-martial dragged on for years. Orders for his execution were reportedly en route to the camp, where he was held when the war ended, and the camp was liberated. He survived. He later testified at war crimes trials. But Hornig was an exceptional case, exceptional in his resistance, and exceptional in the ferocity of the retaliation against him. Most who objected did not resist so openly. Historian Christopher Browning, studying reserve, Police Battalion 101 in occupied Poland, documented that their commanding officer explicitly told the men at the outset that anyone who felt unable to participate in shootings could step out. Some did. They were reassigned to guard or logistics duties. They faced social pressure, ostracism from their comrades, the scorn of peers who saw refusal as weakness or cowardice. That social pressure, not the threat of death, was the actual mechanism of compliance. Browning identifies three categories of perpetrators: those who were eager to participate from the start, those who participated despite moral misgivings because they were ordered to do so, and a significant minority who refused to take part. A minority, documented, present, and crucially not executed for their refusal. The machine ran not on terror directed at its own operators. It ran on ideology, on conformity, on the crushing weight of group expectation in an organization built on absolute hierarchy and absolute loyalty. Now return to the pistol. The reason pistols were specifically used during night executions, or in the final stages of any execution, operation was not ceremonial. It was functional, and it was intimate in a way that made it distinct from the volley. Fire of a full squad. A rifle line creates distance. Multiple men fire simultaneously. The psychological diffusion of responsibility is built in. Perhaps my shot missed. Perhaps it was someone else's bullet. The Einsatzgruppen leaders deliberately structured firing squads to exploit this. Historian Christian Ingrau documented the attempt to make shootings a collective act without individual responsibility. Rotating firing squads were introduced, specifically to distribute the psychological weight. If every man in the unit has pulled the trigger, no single man carries the full burden. The pistol destroyed that mechanism entirely. One man, one victim, close range, no diffusion, no ambiguity. This is why the coup de grace, administered by pistol after the main shooting, was the assignment that broke men most consistently. It was the task that produced the breakdowns, the suicides, the requests for transfer, the quiet refusals. Einsatzgruppen officers, according to contemporaneous reports, tended to be more tolerant of men who faltered specifically during this phase of an operation, precisely because they understood what it was asking. Night made it worse. After dark, disorientation deepened. The sounds, the cries from the pit, the movement in the mass of bodies became harder to process. Men were working by torchlight or not working by any light at all. The die. Pistol had to be pressed closer. The job took longer. Some men who had functioned through the daylight hours during a large operation would reach nightfall and find they could not continue. Their commanders made pragmatic decisions: transfer them, reassign them, don't create paperwork about it. The paperwork that does survive, the Ereignismeldungen, the operational reports the Einsatzgruppen sent back to Berlin, almost never mention psychological problems among the perpetrators. Officials were aware of this as a strategic omission. The reports were data documents, numbers killed, locations, dates. They were not designed to record the human cost to the killers. By late 1941, this had become a leadership crisis at the highest levels of the SS. Himmler understood with cold clarity that the method, mass shootings in the open field with pistols and rifles, face-to-face and in close proximity, was not scalable. Not because of moral objection at the top, but because of psychological attrition at the bottom. Arthur Neber, commander of Einsatzgruppe B, was tasked by Himmler himself with researching alternative killing methods. The motivation was stated explicitly: something more efficient and less emotionally taxing for the executioners. This search led first to the gas van, sealed truck compartments into which carbon monoxide was pumped through. The exhaust, used at Chelmno and in the occupied Soviet Union beginning in late 1941, they were considered an improvement. They removed the pistol, removed the close contact, removed the most intimate phase of the killing from direct human involvement. But they came with their own problems. The roads in the occupied East were poor, the vans broke down, moving large, groups were slower, and critically, someone still had to empty and clean the compartments afterward. What they produced in the end was the stationary gas chamber, the extermination camp, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, the industrial infrastructure that would define the Holocaust in its final, most catastrophic phase. The gas chambers, in other words, were not the plan from the beginning. They were in significant part a response to the psychological fragility of the men with pistols. On October 13, 1941, Himmler instructed SS and police leader Odilo Globoknik to begin construction of Belzec, the first purpose-built extermination camp in occupied Poland. Construction began that month. The first transports arrived in March 1942. The Holocaust's industrial phase was underway. On October 4, 1943, at a town hall in Posen, the city the Germans called Posen, today Poznan in occupied Poland, Heinrich Himmler delivered a speech to approximately 92 senior SS officers. He spoke for 3 hours. The speech was recorded, transcribed, corrected in Himmler's own handwriting, and filed. It survived the war. It was used as evidence at Nuremberg. It is one of the most significant documents in the history of the Holocaust because it is the only known recording of a member of Hitler's cabinet explicitly describing the ongoing extermination of the Jews in direct, unambiguous language. In it, Himmler acknowledged the psychological weight of what his men had done. He praised them for it. He said, and these words appear in the Nuremberg trial record, document 1919 PS, that they had borne the sight of hundreds of 500 of 1,000 corpses lying side by side, and had remained, apart from exceptions caused by human weakness, decent fellows. Decent fellows! He called it a page of glory in their history that had never been written and was never to be written. He was not speaking metaphorically. He meant it literally. What had been done was to remain unrecorded, unspoken, secret. The world was not to know. Even the men who did it were not officially to speak of it. The silence was the point. And yet here was Himmler, speaking of it openly, to a room full of the men who had ordered it done, praising their hardness, acknowledging the burden, and insisting that their decency, their ability to commit mass murder without becoming savages, was precisely what made them valuable. He used the word Seelenbelastung, burdening of the soul. He knew the word because his men had been using it for 2 years. What does it mean, historically, that this crisis existed? It does not mean, and this matters, that the Holocaust could have been stopped by the psychological fragility of its perpetrators. It was not stopped. More than 6 million Jews were killed. The machinery, once it shifted from the pistol to the gas chamber, became more efficient, not less. The breakdowns of individual men in fields in Lithuania and Ukraine in 1941 did not interrupt the genocide. They accelerated the search for a method that would reduce those breakdowns. The crisis of the perpetrators made the killing worse, not better. What it does mean is that the post-war claim, "We had no choice, we would have been shot if we refused," collapses under scrutiny. Men did refuse, they were not shot. The machine kept running because enough men chose to keep running it, not because every man was compelled at gunpoint. It also means that the psychology of genocide is not a story of monsters. That is the easy version, and it is wrong. Historian Christopher Browning's landmark book Ordinary Men makes this argument with devastating precision. The men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 were not selected for ideological fervor. They were middle-aged, largely unremarkable German men who, when given a choice, mostly chose to shoot rather than face the social discomfort of opting out. The uncomfortable truth, documented, verified, unavoidable, is that ordinary social mechanisms drove extraordinary atrocity, peer pressure, conformity, career ambition, the unwillingness to be seen as weak by people you eat and sleep and drink beside. The pistol exposed all of this because the pistol made the individual act visible. The gas chamber was designed, in part, to make it invisible again. There is one more detail, and it is a small one. Small in scale, not small in meaning. At Auschwitz's Block 11, the punishment block, the place where individual executions were carried out by the SS, throughout the camp's operation, there is a courtyard. In that courtyard stands what is called the death wall. Prisoners were led to it in pairs. The SS executioner came from behind, one shot. The procedure was so routinized, so normalized within the administrative structure of the camp, that Auschwitz records it as a category shooting, listed alongside flogging and confinement, a punishment, a process, something that appears on a form. The wall still stands. The courtyard at Block 11, Auschwitz the Firs, is open to visitors. It is a small space, smaller than most people expect. The distance from the door of the block to the wall is not far. You can cross it in seconds. The men who crossed it thousands of times with a pistol in their hand were, in Himmler's framing, decent fellows who had borne a terrible burden. The wall does not offer an opinion on that. It is just a wall. And the question of what makes an ordinary man capable of walking toward it again and again season after season, year after year, that question does not have a clean answer. It never did. If this video made you think, if it raised questions you hadn't considered before, please subscribe and share it with someone who takes history seriously. These stories are too important to disappear. We'll see you in the next one.